Number 10. Sarah Everard. Police officers are supposed to enforce the law and protect citizens, but one cop from London did the opposite of his duty after abusing his authorization and COVID-19 protective laws to take advantage of a 33-year-old woman named Sarah Everard. In March 2021, 48-year-old Wayne Cousins used his police ID to trick Sarah into his squad car. He made the situation seem like a false arrest, saying that she'd broken the lockdown rules as she was walking home from a friend's house. Once she was inside his vehicle, Wayne drove them far away from the city before murdering her. He also assaulted her sexually as she was helpless to fight back. The victim's remains were discovered about a week after her disappearance in a secluded area of woods that was 60 or so miles from London. Detectives noted that she'd been strangled to death and set on fire. Apparently, the day of the kidnapping, Wayne was stationed at the city's U.S. Embassy for an overnight shift. His fellow officers were disgusted by what he did, and the public heavily criticized Scotland Yard, saying they weren't doing their job to protect women. Before Wayne's arrest and the murder, he had 2 prior incidents where he was accused of indecent exposure. Some argue that if his superiors had properly looked into the matter beforehand, Sarah might still be alive today. As punishment, the killer was ordered to spend the rest of his life in prison. Number 9. Daniel Briceño Garcia. On April 1st in 2020, about a month after the pandemic chaos began, 46-year-old Daniel Briceño Garcia brutally murdered his landlords due to extreme paranoia. He lived in a home owned by 66-year-old Sonia Butrón Calvi and 60-year-old Edward Aguilera Daza. Apart from them, 5 other people called the London property home. With the uncertainty surrounding the COVID-19 crisis and lockdown, Daniel was concerned over how he was going to pay his rent. Those who knew the man said he was starting to act crazy and was worried about catching the virus. While those concerns were valid, considering no one back then fully understood what the future held, Daniel's subsequent actions were inexcusable. One of the housemates complained to Sonia that Daniel was almost always miserable. Then, on the night of the murders, that same resident heard a commotion happening outside her bedroom. When she went to see what was going on, she saw Daniel stabbing Edgar in the stomach. The roommate quickly went back into her room, afraid for her own life. When things seemed quiet, she poked her head out again and saw Daniel cleaning up the crime scene. When police finally arrived, he came out of the house with his hands up. Detectives found Sonia dead in the kitchen, while Edgar was lying in his own blood. Inside the killer's room, they discovered strange writing on a whiteboard in different languages, detailing crazed scribblings about the pandemic. In court, Daniel claimed he was mentally ill and truly believed the victims wanted him dead. He also said he was hearing strange voices leading up to the attack. Despite this, he was found guilty and was sentenced to life behind bars. Number 8. Helen Bannister. Domestic violence cases skyrocketed during the pandemic. With so many people being forced to spend countless hours together inside, tensions were sure to rise. In December 2020, 48-year-old Helen Bannister was killed at the home she shared with her boyfriend, 37-year-old Jonathan Campbell, in Swansea, Wales. And it was all because he believed she was cheating on him. The only evidence he had supporting this claim, though, were scandalous photos he found of the victim on her own phone. But get this, Jonathan was actually the one being unfaithful. When he found the photo, his own guilt over talking to another woman must have manifested into a violent rage. He'd hurt Helen before and was even sent to prison for it. But this time was different. He took things way too far. After beating his girlfriend to a pulp and headbutting her several times, Jonathan simply put her body in the bathtub to try to get some of the blood off. He then left her there, beaten and bruised, before leaving their home to see his secret lover. The man did call emergency responders to clean up his mess, saying Helen was out on the couch. When they found her, she was completely battered and had sustained severe injuries. One of her daughters, Sarah, described her as looking like an elephant man and how swollen her face had become. Sarah also said that she'd never liked Jonathan and truly believed he'd kill her mom one day. Sadly, she was right. Doctors did everything they could to try and save Helen at the hospital, but it wasn't enough. The couple were together for 6 years before the fatal incident. But luckily, Jonathan will spend much longer than that behind bars after getting sentenced to life in prison. Number 7. Just a drill. Unfortunately, the US has a serious problem with mass shootings, with many of them taking place at schools. It's common for children in the country to have active shooter drills, so they know where to go and what to do in case of an emergency. But even with instructions, in a life-or-death situation, people, and especially kids, panic. In 2019, the New Richmond Middle School issued a lockdown alert during what they call an ALICE drill. This drill stands for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate, and they do it to prepare for unthinkable emergencies. The school's principal, Court Lilly, told reporters that she tries to emulate the real situation by using loud air horns and walking through the building after the lockdown. Many students didn't know what to do with themselves during the drill. It seemed like some of them weren't even aware that it was just practice, and so they were terrified. Chaos quickly broke out, and some kids received bruises, cuts, and bumps after falling on the ground during their rush to safety. 2 minors even had to receive treatment from EMTs after the fact. This failed drill served as a reminder that schools, administrators, and staff need to better prepare children for emergency situations. While it's tragic that kids have to worry about school shootings at all, it's sadly the reality Americans live with today. Number 6. Michelle Silvertino. On June 5, 2020, 33-year-old Michelle Silvertino was discovered passed out under a bridge in Manila. She'd been trying to get on a bus that would take her to her hometown, Calabunga, which was almost 250 miles away. Due to the strict COVID-19 lockdown rules in place, though, little to no public transportation was operating at that time in the Philippines. So in order to get home to her 4 children, Michelle started walking and planned to find a ride on the way. On her journey, though, she was stranded under the bridge. The people who found her took her to a hospital, but she was quickly declared dead. When news of her passing spread online, people were outraged. They called for officials in the Philippines to do more in order to help innocent people like Michelle who were stranded during lockdown. Many workers in the country were in the same boat when buses and other transportation shut down thanks to restrictions. Apparently, at one point, hundreds of people had to camp by the airport in Manila after canceled flights. If there's one positive out of Michelle's death, it's that the public reaction forced the country's president to take action. They began reopening bus stops and airports soon after to make sure no more lives were needlessly lost. What would you do if you were stranded hundreds of miles away from your home? Let us know in the comments down below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel to join the Badger fam. Number 5. Mary Collins. At the very beginning of the COVID-19 lockdown, a 20-year-old woman named Mary Collins was murdered by 4 suspected people. One of them was 21-year-old James Salerno. It's believed that he and his accomplices invited the victim to one of their apartments. She was told that they'd all just be hanging out, but instead, she was tortured to death. Police officers found Mary's body almost a week after she'd been killed, with over 133 stab wounds. Her head also received a severe beating, having been bludgeoned repeatedly. The woman's grandma told reporters that Mary had an intellectual disability. The killers likely took advantage of this fact to gain her trust. The murder shocked many people, especially considering how little it seemed the suspects cared. Take Salerno, for example. He was granted bail in 2023 after his parents helped pay a $250,000 bond fee. On their way out of the courtroom, Salerno and his family were allegedly smiling and laughing right in front of Mary's grandma. Kelly Lavery, another person who participated in Mary's death, pled guilty to her role, and as a result, she was given 32 years in prison. The other killers pled not guilty, so their convictions are still up in the air. So unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see how this case plays out. Number 4. KAYLEA TITFORD. For many people with special needs or disabilities, they rely heavily on others to help them through life. A 16-year-old girl named KAYLEA TITFORD from England suffered from spina bifida, which confined her to a wheelchair most of the time. When the pandemic started, she was forced to stay home like everyone else. KAYLEA's parents had the responsibility of helping her with some simple tasks, but instead, they chose to simply keep her in her bedroom. The young girl had serious health issues, and her parents, 45-year-old Alan Titford and 39-year-old Sarah Lloyd Jones, did absolutely nothing to help her. Unfortunately, in October 2020, KAYLEA passed away after living in filth for weeks. Her body was discovered in her room. Surrounding her bed were soaked puppy pads that the girl had to use the restroom on because her parents wouldn't take her to the proper restroom. She also hadn't been bathed for weeks leading up to her death, and investigators say KAYLEA was subjected to animalistic conditions. She was also morbidly obese as well, and weighed around 320 pounds at the time of her passing. We wish we could say that was everything, but there's more. Maggots were discovered around the teenager's legs and lower regions. Experts say that they were likely there while she was still alive. It doesn't seem like enough considering the severe mistreatment, but KAYLEA's father was sentenced to 7.5 years while her mother received 6. In our opinion, they each should have been sentenced to life behind bars. Number 3. Luca Franzese. Luca Franzese played in an Italian TV drama called Gomorrah. In March 2020, he posted a video of himself online pleading for help. He spoke to the camera saying that he was trapped inside his home in Naples with his 47-year-old sister. The problem was, his sister Teresa died from the coronavirus. Luca was stuck with the decaying body of his beloved sibling because no funeral home would take her. If you remember, the beginning of lockdown was an incredibly scary time. Some even feared it was the end of the world. About 60 million people were forced to stay indoors in Italy. Teresa was given a COVID test after she'd passed away, and it came back positive. Luca says that he tried to give his sister mouth-to-mouth to resuscitate her since no emergency crews answered his call. In an already terrifying situation, he believed he could have contracted the disease from this attempt to save Teresa's life. In the video, he pleads with his fans and internet users to support each other, claiming that his country abandoned him. While it seems like a long time ago now, it's crazy to think that situations like this happened only 3 short years ago. Number 2. Anita Das. In May 2020, a woman from Delhi, India tried to get away with murder. The killer, 35-year-old Anita Das, ended her husband's life with help from a friend. They tried to pass his death off as a COVID casualty, but ultimately, they failed. The victim, Sharat Das, was 45 years old and had 2 kids with Anita. One of the couple's neighbors called police on May 2nd with suspicions over Sharat's death. They said they'd spoken to Anita, and she said her lover likely died from the virus. This seemed off to the neighbors since he hadn't seen the victim acting sick at all. When officers went to question the woman, they told her to hand over her husband's medical records. She wasn't able to though, saying that she simply found him dead one morning. However, an autopsy showed what Anita was hiding. Sharat was killed by asphyxiation. After the news came to light, Anita soon owned up to what she did. Apparently, she and her friend Sanjay were having an affair. The victim discovered his wife's infidelity, and this led to multiple arguments until Anita couldn't take it anymore. So she used a blanket to smother Sharat to death. Number 1. Logan MWANGI. When children are in a hostile home environment, social services are supposed to step in, remove them from the situation, and protect them. Sadly, the system failed a 5-year-old boy named Logan MWANGI in July 2021. His parents were previously flagged by Child Protection, but they were able to regain custody thanks to the coronavirus lockdown. With so much time spent at home, they hid the boy's physical abuse well. Many of the family's social workers weren't able to attend meetings with Logan's parents due to the restrictions in place. Because of this and other concerns, not enough time was spent looking into Logan's care. The boy's stepdad, 40-year-old John Cole, was captured on a CCTV security camera taking Logan's body to a river. He was accompanied by the child's 14-year-old stepbrother, Craig Mulligan. Investigators found about 56 injuries on the victim, including brain trauma, a torn liver, burns, and more. Cole, Craig, and Logan's mom, Angharad Williamson, were all handed a life sentence with a minimum of 29 years in prison for the abusive murder. It's heartbreaking to think that this child might have still been alive if social services had done more to protect him. What was your worst lockdown experience like? Let us know in the comments down below. And remember to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Bad Badger. Bye guys!